Welcome everyone to our Packers News Chat alongside Tom Silverstein. I am Olivia Reiner. The Packers held their first practice leading up to week 1 against the Minnesota Vikings in Minneapolis. We'll discuss some of the biggest storylines surrounding the offensive line in today's live stream. However, before we get into that, as always, I want to remind you, you can be a part of our conversation. If you're over on Facebook, leave us a question, leave us a comment down in the chat. Tom and I will answer some of those toward the end of our discussion today. Head coach Matt LaFleur once again would not confirm who the starting right tackle will be in Minneapolis. Guard/tackle Billy Turner has been battling through an injury he sustained last week in Sunday's scrimmage against the other Packers in the Lambeau Field. He's been going through training camp, competing for that right tackle position alongside Rick Wagner. Tom, how likely is it that Wagner is the starter come Sunday because Turner hasn't practiced in a week?
Well, someone is probably going to start in place of Billy Turner. And Wagner has to show them that his elbow which he injured early in camp and has been practicing with a brace, is strong enough that he can make the moves that he has to. I sort of get the sense that they don't feel like he's ready, like he's still a little bit away from being ready to play, and that they're exploring other possibilities. Billy Turner was doing some work on the side today, running the ladder, but my gut tells me they hold him out a week so that they don't have to worry about this injury all season long.
Speaking of some other options, LaFleur would not rule out that Elgton Jenkins could be a possibility at tackle. He has been adamant over and over again that he will put out the best combination of 5 offensive linemen to start on Sunday. That being said, Jenkins has had some experience at tackle in college. Tom, how likely is it that the Packers are seriously considering Jenkins at right tackle?
I honestly think that Elgton Jenkins could play anywhere he wants on the offensive line. That if something happened to David Bakhtiari, they could slide him over to left tackle. He is their most athletic offensive lineman. And so I think it's a possibility. You could also bump Lane Taylor out there. He's played some tackle. But you have to be careful. You strengthen one position and you weaken another. Lucas Patrick would come in and play guard, and he's got experience. But, they have to worry about the ends of Minnesota. If Donnell Hunter is there, healthy, that's dangerous. And then Yannick Ngakoue coming in is another really dangerous pass rusher. So they got to make sure their ducks are in order.
They have a lot to concern themselves with as far as the pass rushing talent of the Minnesota Vikings. However, they are still concerned about some of the inside interior players and some of the competition along those spots on the offensive line. Speaking of Lane Taylor, you mentioned him, Tom. He is finally healthy. He spent most of last season on IR with a biceps injury. He comes back in training camp, and he impresses. He only lost one of his many head-to-head, one-on-one pass rush drills. Tom, what does the future look like for Lane Taylor in this Packers offense?
Well, I think he's found a fit there. I always thought that he was not a good fit for Matt LaFleur's offense, that he's not really a zone type of a guy. He's the kind of guy you want who just goes on a guy and drives him off the ball. But apparently, his pass blocking has been as good as I've seen it. And if you could pass block in the NFL, you could play anywhere. And so I think it'll be interesting to see him when they're healthy and they have Turner, Lane Taylor, and then they can put Mercedes Lewis on the outside. That might be the 3 top run blockers they have. And I could see them running a lot off that.
The Packers will continue to work out some of their competition along the right side of the offensive line. However, at least at the moment, along the left side of the offensive line there at left tackle, David Bakhtiari is the clear starter. That being said, when the Packers announced their initial 53-man roster, they announced that Yosh Nijman would be that backup tackle, most likely to be backing up David Bakhtiari with Rick Wagner and Billy Turner over on the right side, still in competition and able to back one or the other up and slide Lane Taylor potentially in at right guard if need be. Tom, how confident are the Packers that Nijman, if needed, could start if David Bakhtiari were to go down?
I think they got to be very nervous about it and hoping that Bakhtiari makes it through. Now, that's another situation where would they swing Elton Jenkins over there? It's the most important position on the offensive line. I don't know, but Nijman had too much potential to let him go on the street. Somebody would have swept him up. He's big. He's got great feet. Really good feet that I've ever seen for a guy his size, 6'7", 315. So the potential's there, and who knows? Sometimes they threw David Bakhtiari out there when he was a rookie, and next thing you know, I mean, he had his ups and downs, but he held his own.
It's definitely a possibility that they might need him at some point during the season. However, the Packers do have the luxury of an expanded practice squad, a 16-man practice squad, where they're still able to keep last year's backup, Alex Light, who has some NFL experience. He did not make the 53. It's clear that Yosh Nijman made it over Light. However, if they do need to call up a player on game day, they're allowed to carry 55 players on the roster come the week of the game, and then they'd have to whittle it down from there to who they want their active roster on game day to be. So they do have that option there if needed. Let us move over to Facebook for some of your lovely questions. We have a really interesting question here, something that I've been mulling over as we've gone through this unusual training camp. Mike asks, if kicker Mason Crosby goes down with COVID-19, who would be the next kicker up? General Manager Brian Gutekunst has said that he and his staff have had those conversations about who the emergency players might be that aren't necessarily in the building going forward. Tom, who would likely replace Crosby if he were not healthy enough come game day?
I'm sure they've tried some guys out. J.K. Scott kicked off some, and he would probably be the logical guy to take over. I think that if they had Eddie sign that Mason Crosby, let's say on a Thursday, he tested positive, even a Friday, well, I don't know about a Friday, but if they can reach out and get a kicker. I mean, they did that when J.K. Scott had the problem in New England, I think it was it? And they had to get a punter in. He ended up punting. But, yeah, that could be interesting. Like if he tested positive on a Saturday, there's a 2-day wait period. They'd have to go with Scott, I think.
We've been asking a lot of what ifs. What if head coach Matt LaFleur came down with it? What would happen? Who would be coaching his players without him present in the building? He's said that he would be able to do most of what he does remotely over Zoom, so they are lucky to have the coaching staff set up with that technology. However, when it comes to players that there's only one of them and they're more or less irreplaceable on the roster, it is a very good question. We saw the Eagles sign their own emergency backup quarterback to the practice squad in Josh McCown just yesterday, which is an interesting idea. I'd be really interested to see if Brian Gutekunst has a similar sort of deal down the line at some point.
Yeah, I don't know. I sort of feel like he's got 3 quarterbacks on the roster. Yeah, they could all get infected, but that could happen at any position. So, I don't think you need to do that. If I started seeing the league, lots of players testing positive, then I'd think about it.
Mm-hmm. Something to keep in mind as we move forward through the season. Let's move over to David, not Daniel. David asks, who is playing inside linebacker next to Christian Kirksey, which has been a very popular question. And it's a question that technically we do not yet have the answer to, as the Packers have yet to comment on depth chart. However, we can inform you based off of our observations that we've made in training camp. It seemed for a little while that rookie inside linebacker Kamal Martin was making his case throughout training camp to be that starter alongside Christian Kirksey. He got lots of reps with him during training camp practices. He was competing for that spot alongside Oren Burks. Burks was also competing. He has been competing for that second inside linebacker spot. However, Martin seemingly jumped ahead of Burks in the depth chart once Burks dropped out due to an undisclosed injury. Now that Kamal Martin is dealing with an injury, he reportedly had surgery on his knee following an injury sustained in training camp. Burks is back and he's healthy. He's been practicing. How likely is it that Burks is the second inside linebacker alongside Christian Kirksey?
Well, technically he is, but I don't know if he's healthy. I don't know if he's completely healthy. And I think it's possible they better be ready to have someone else play there. Ty Summers is the only inside linebacker they have on the roster. Other inside linebacker, they have Chris Barnes on the practice squad. He could play. They could bring him up. It's a problem. It's a problem spot. If, Burks is the guy, he should be the guy. But he didn't do much today that I saw. So I wonder if either they're holding him back to make sure he's healthy for the practice week, or he's not quite 100%. I don't know. But that's a problem spot for sure.
You've been saying that, Tom, since going back at least to the draft. You thought the inside linebacker was a spot that the Packers should have drafted in the first round. They did not. They ended up with Jordan Love and a slew of other players later in the draft.
Yeah.
They did ultimately draft Martin in the 5th round. However, now Martin is injured.
That's, it really looked like Kamal Martin was going to be the starter. And I'm sure he was in their minds. But injuries are going to happen, and this is the kind of thing that's going to happen during the season. If you have a weakness and then you suffer an injury or a COVID outbreak, man, it could just break down your whole team. So I think that is a Achilles heel for them, and I believe Minnesota will try to take advantage of it.
Certainly something to keep an eye on going forward as far as Oren Burks' development as the Packers start to get through the beginning of the regular season. Let's move. Let's actually discuss some breaking news. Why not? Because I have an email in my inbox. So this is the benefit of going live, right? So the Packers have announced that they've placed cornerback Kabion Ento and inside linebacker Kamal Martin on injured reserve. And they also have announced that they've signed cornerback Perry Nickerson. Nickerson is a third-year player out of Tulane University who was drafted by the Jets in the 6th round. He started twice for the Jets in 16 games as a rookie, and then was traded to the Seahawks in August of last season. So the Packers are clearly keeping an eye on the Seahawks. Oh, and then he most recently was on the Jacksonville Jaguars practice squad. So there's a quick update on that. So I think that confirms what we all expected, that the Packers were going to be placing Martin eventually, and both him and Kabion Ento on injured reserve. Both of those players had recent surgery. It made sense that they would want to keep them. It means that they do have the option in the future to bring them back off of injured reserve. The rules surrounding injured reserve this season are a little bit different than years past. The Packers only have to have their players on IR stay there for 3 weeks. Then they're allowed to bring back an unlimited number of players off of IR and designate them to return back to play. So that could be really beneficial if Kamal Martin is able to come back.
It's huge. In the past, you got either one or two guys who you could bring back, and that was after, I believe, 8 weeks. So, this was definitely put in place for COVID, and the Packers are taking advantage of it. It's a smart move. I would have done the same thing. They know Kamal Martin's not going to be ready, and they know Ento's not going to be ready. I'm a little bit surprised they signed a corner. maybe it's for special teams reasons, and because Ento's a corner, they just felt like they needed to replace that position. Or he's a guy they've just had their eye on and were curious about. But yeah, that's a little odd that they have enough corners. They have more than enough corners. So I guess it's corner for a corner, but that also gives them another roster spot, too.
It does. So now the roster currently stands at 52, which means they can bring someone up from the practice squad if they choose to. It also means, I believe, so yesterday, Tom, the Packers announced 14 of the 16 players signed to their practice squad. All of those names were players that had previously been with the Packers in training camp. We also reported that the Packers have signed 2 outside players as well, whose names are going to escape me right now. An inside linebacker and a wide receiver.
Yeah, and the wide receiver's got great speed. I mean, those are practice squad guys. That's all it is. You know, I do wonder if possibly that spot could go to Chris Barnes, maybe just because they need another inside linebacker and he knows the system. That could be a possibility if Burks is banged up.
One of those spots, like I said, will go to a practice squad player because Dexter Williams will reportedly, from our Jim Ozarski, will be signing with the Packers practice squad tonight as he comes back to Green Bay. He had left town for a personal matter. So that is how sort of the accounting will work between the practice squad and the active roster now with these IR placements. So anyway, we'll get back to some of your questions here. Josh asks, should Packers fans be concerned about the wide receiving core? The Packers announced that there will be 5 wide receivers on the initial 53, including Marquez Valdes-Scantling, Devontae Adams, Equanimeous St. Brown, Allen Lazard, and former practice squad member Malik Taylor. Taylor makes the team over players like Jake Kumaro, Reggie Begelton, even a Darius Shepard who made the initial 53 last season out of training camp. How concerned should Packers fans be, Tom, about the state of the wide receiving core?
They should be concerned. If Valdes-Scantling doesn't rebound off of last year, and Lazard's their, number 2 and really the main contributor, that's not real dynamic group behind Devontae Adams. They really need Valdes-Scantling to show up because he's the kind of guy who can stretch the field. I think when you look at their wide receivers too, though, you've got to include the tight ends because they're going to be part of this too. Just like Jimmy Graham, he lined up as a wide receiver pretty much. You have to consider Tyler Ervin, who is a guy who can play running back and split out. So, the numbers wise, they're fine. They just got to find someone who can, really tear up the field a little bit next to Devontae Adams.
The Packers need playmakers. It does not matter if they are a wide receiver, a tight end, an H-back, a running back. Whoever can contribute and help this offense will be greatly appreciated going into the season. Let's go over here to Mike. Mike asks, any free agents out there that the Packers might be looking at? Well, funny you ask that. Tom reported earlier this morning that the Packers are working out veteran center Justin Britt. How interested are the Packers in bringing Britt along to bolster their offensive line depth?
I don't know. I think they could just be doing a medical check on him. He's coming back from an ACL injury. But he'd also be a guy who could really solidify the inside of their line. Now, he's basically a center. So he could be a backup for Corey Linsley. He's probably looking for a starting job. He's the Seahawks starting center the last 4 years. He's only 29 years old. He's got some playing time ahead of him. But, maybe he decides he won't, maybe they decide they need a backup center. They really don't have one. Elton Jenkins would be the backup center, or Lucas Patrick. And, Elton Jenkins can only play so many positions on the line at the same time. He can't play right tackle, left tackle, and center. So it's possible if they really like what shape Justin Britt is in, they could bring him in.
Certainly a possibility with the lack of depth there at center. And especially now with Jake Hansen on the practice squad as well, it's clear that the Packers don't see him as being ready to back up center Corey Linsley just yet.
And Britt has played tackle. You don't want him there, but he played tackle and guard his first 2 years. So, in a pinch, I guess. But he's not ready to play. He hasn't had a training camp, so this would be a long-term kind of signing if they did it.
Yesterday, General Manager Brian Gutekunst said that they've been working out players, not necessarily to sign them to the 53. It's been more of a necessity to check in on them medically, especially if they need to call on someone down the line, as we mentioned, emergency scenario. If your entire offensive line gets infected, that could be a problem.
Yeah, you have to have an emergency list. You always do. And that's why they bring guys in. They want to update it. They want to see who's healthy, who might surprise them. Maybe this guy's made some drastic improvement over time. So.
Certainly something hard work that Brian Gutekunst needs to put in as the Packers gear up for the start of the season. Let's take a pointer here from Josh. Josh says Jay Sternberger is going to take the next step this season. Tight end Jay Sternberger came into this training camp. He tested positive for COVID-19, and then he missed all of the acclimation period and missed the very beginning of training camp on-field practices. Tom, how has he developed throughout training camp getting ready for the regular season?
Not very well. I thought he had a pretty mediocre to poor training camp. He was not a big factor, and the whole off season it was built up that Jay Sternberger is going to be their threat, and for whatever reason, maybe the COVID being isolated for 2 weeks, he fell behind. And so they'll continue working him in. They still think he's a good deep threat. But it might take a little longer than people expected for him to have a contribution.
Definitely a challenge coming into training camp this season with COVID-19, not having any preseason games for Sternberger either, an unusual offseason. Absolutely. It'll be interesting to see how he progresses going forward and seeing how the Packers decide to work him in the offense as we get closer to the start of the regular season. That's going to do it for us today, everyone. Make sure you come back on Wednesday. We will be doing another live stream. We'll be chatting with you once again. Bring your questions if we did not get to them this time around. Also, make sure you're checking out PackersNews.com for all of your Packers news. Follow us on all of our social media platforms. We'll have lots of updates for you going forward this week. The Packers are off tomorrow, so we will not be back with you tomorrow. However, like I said, Wednesday is the day.